name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Today's Gospel from Luke contains a story that is featured in all three of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The setting here is the temple in Jerusalem during the tense, ominous days leading up to the crucifixion. Now Jesus had been in the temple teaching every day since he had arrived in Jerusalem in triumph. He was in the midst of the city during the busy, crowded time of Passover, teaching to massive crowds. In Matthew's Gospel, the word is translated as multitudes. Word of Jesus' miracles and his sayings had spread far and wide. So by the time he had arrived at the city gates of Jerusalem, he was greeted like a hero or a king. As if this wasn't dangerous enough, he had then proceeded to not behave like a hero or a king, but rather as a rebel who threatened to destroy the entire Jewish hierarchy. The scene that we hear about today happened shortly after Jesus had cleansed the temple of the money changers. In the previous chapter, chapter 19 of Luke, it says, "The chief priests, scribes, and leaders of the people were intent on killing him. Yet they could not find a way to do so because all the people hung on his words." It was in this situation that Jesus was approached by men from one of the highest levels of the Jewish priestly and political class, the Sadducees. One of the main functions of the Sadducees was to maintain the temple. So you can imagine how angry they were that Jesus had just overturned the tables of the money changers and the livestock sellers and proclaimed that the temple, which was so valuable to them, had become a den of thieves and that it would be destroyed. Since they and the other authorities could not arrest Jesus for fear of the multitudes, they decided to try instead to discredit him by exposing one of his teachings as ludicrous, the teaching about the resurrection. It says in the text that the Sadducees say there is no resurrection. This is because the Sadducees were purists. They only believed what was written in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, and they rejected the Nevi'im, or the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. Basically, they rejected the rest of the entire Hebrew Bible. The Torah referred only to Sheol, the place of darkness and absence of life where souls go after death, and that is what the Sadducees believed. If something didn't appear in the Torah, they maintained it was not the truth, and resurrection, which they said did not appear in the Torah, was not truth. So the Sadducees decide here to pose a question about levirate marriage to Jesus to prove to the multitudes that he didn't know what he was talking about. Levirate derives from the Latin word levir, meaning husband's brother. According to Jewish law and the law of many other tribal and clan-based cultures, a man is obliged to marry the widow of his brother in order to continue providing for the woman, and in this particular historical context, to keep the wealth of the family intact by maintaining the woman as part of the family's possessions. The Sadducees present this scenario to Jesus with a series of 7 brothers who all die childless, and they think they're really going to stump him by asking, if there is this ridiculously illogical thing that you believe in called resurrection, whose wife would this woman be in it? Instead of answering their question with another question, as he often did, or even engaging in their level of legalistic argument, Jesus instead turns the entire argument on its head. He basically says that the resurrection is beyond any concept of marriage or ownership of women or wealth or laws that have been formed within the tiny frame of reference that our primitive human brains have manufactured. He's basically saying to them that God is so much bigger than this. The timing of this sermon is interesting to me because just a couple of weeks ago, I went to a lecture by a man named Eben Alexander, who wrote a New York Times bestseller called Proof of Heaven, about what he believes to be his near-death experience. Eben was in a coma for seven days, and during that time, he says that he saw heaven. His experiences are a fascinating read, and they provide a wonderful starting point for us to try and define our own beliefs about what happens after we die. Eben is a very eccentric guy, and his persona is larger than life. Some people think he's a genius, and some people think he is completely bonkers. But he did say something in his lecture that stayed with me, and which resonated as I read Jesus' words here about the resurrection and the bigness of God. Eben said that his experiences of God were so far beyond the realm of human perception that he cannot put the majority of them into words. He said that they do not fit human language or thought. The only thing he can liken them to is the idea within quantum physics, which suggests that what we know as reality is actually only an illusion. The only thing that is real, Eben says, is God. Jesus, after delivering his mind-blowing description of the resurrection and the bigness of God to the Sadducees, counteracts their argument completely by reminding them that in Exodus and the Torah, their only source of sacred knowledge, God himself declares to Moses from the burning bush that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are dead and have gone to nothingness, Jesus is asking, how could our God, a living God, be a God of nothingness? Instead, he is the God of the living. Jesus proclaims here that the dead are raised, they are alive. Jesus told his disciples on many occasions that he would be resurrected. He also spoke about the resurrection of the dead at the end of time, and he referred to the ongoing resurrection of the faithful departed, words which we echo in our Nicene Creed when we say, on the third day he rose again in accordance with the scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. And we also say, we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. When I express beliefs such as this among non-believers, sometimes people look at me like I might be completely bonkers, and they offer their own logical arguments to try to bring me down to reality. The truth is, I personally cannot know exactly what happens to us after we die, because as a human being, I cannot possibly comprehend it. But I do know what Jesus said about it. I also know that it is not possible that this life is all there is, and that we only have one shot, because the God I know, the God of love and hope, is bigger than that. Amen.
Amen.